Hey everybody, Brian Bell back with my top 10 books that I read in all of 2024. There are going to be books from several genres. There's going to be fantasy, there's going to be science fiction, there's going to be historical fiction, there's even going to be some literary fiction, possibly some lit RPG. We'll see as we go. Couple of rules that I want to mention. I don't do a whole lot of rules here on the channel, but for this one, I felt it was kind of important. The rule number one is that only one book per author. Otherwise, Steven Erikson would have absolutely decimated this top 10 list because this was the year that I started Malazan. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is that I tried to be consistent with my thoughts throughout the year. So I did go back and watch a lot of my kind of monthly recaps to find out which came in first, second, third for me during the month, at least mentally in my own notes, that I could make sure that I was being consistent with you guys. So when I came back and did this list, it wasn't completely out of the blue. So that said, if you've been a regular watcher of BellTube, you're not going to find a whole lot of surprises here because I've gushed about all of these books for very different reasons throughout 2024. Let's get into this. Let's have some fun. Let's roll the intro. Okay, we're back. We're going to do a couple of honorable mentions. And one thing that we're going to do in the top 10 itself is I'm going to share with you the booktuber who got me to read the book in the first place. Whose recommendation did I follow? So maybe you can find out if they align with yours if you don't already know. All right, first honorable mention goes to House of Chains. This is book 4 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen by author Steven Erikson. You guys, if I was doing, as I mentioned earlier, just the truest of true top 10 lists, this would have been a top 5 book for me. But because of the rule of one book per author, this is going to just get an honorable mention. This is the most recent book that I have read. I've only read books 1 through 4, and they keep getting better and better, although, as you know, we're probably talking about logic here. There is one that I liked just slightly better than this one. But House of Chains, Witness. This is a great book. This is a great series. If you've not yet picked it up, I'm a strong recommend on Malazan. Let's move to the next one. And the other honorable mention is going to go to a lit RPG book written by author Eric Uegland. Nobody recommended this one to me because I recommended this to myself. This is book 11 in the Bad Guys series, and it is called Two Lies, Two Thrones, narrated by the incomparable Neil Hellegers. I have been on the Neil Hellegers mountain, as you know, since this channel started. His voice acting just brought this story to life, and Eric Uegland in Two Lies, Two Thrones converged a lot of characters, both from the Bad Guys series and from the Good Guys series, back into the home city of Glatton in the world of Valdrani. I know that doesn't mean anything to most of you, but if you do read The Good Guys and The Bad Guys by Eric Uegland, you'll probably understand why Two Lies, Two Thrones gets an honorable mention for 2024. All right, it's time to hit the top 10. Coming in at number 10, we have a book that was read by the illustrious Quilluminati. Yes, this book was recommended by Dr. Philip Chase himself, and of course, I am talking about Bernard Cornwell's The Last Kingdom, right? Uhtred, son of Uhtred. This is a relatively recent read. We just read this in the month of December, and I have to tell you, I am sold. This is book 1 of the Saxon stories. A lot of people have asked me, are you going to continue with this series? The answer is yes. I just don't know exactly quite when yet. It's probably going to be about middle of 2025. But I don't think that there's too many authors that can write historical fiction quite as well as Bernard Cornwell. Certainly not the epic battle scenes. He really brings us into the battle itself. We feel what it's like to be on that shield wall. We feel what it's like waiting on a hill for the impending battle come morn when the sun is out. we're just there. And for those reasons and plenty other that we discussed on our live stream when the Quilluminati met earlier on BellTube this month, and if you've not seen it, I will throw a link right here. I gotta say, number 10, The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell. Let's move on. Coming in at number 9, we are back in the Quilluminati. I'm telling you guys, there was a reason that we formed this book club, because we knew we would find not only great books, but books that are outside of our normal reading. Now, this one is not historical fiction. In fact, it's not fantasy or sci-fi either. This is the one and only true literary fiction book that I have that you would go find in a Barnes & Noble or a bookstore outside of the fantasy section. We are talking about a book that Mike recommended, and we're talking about Ordinary Grace by fellow Minnesotan William Kent Krueger. All right, so this book is set in the 1960s. It covers the life of a family in a small town in southwest Minnesota. I am vaguely familiar with the area because it is a made-up city, but I have a pretty good general sense of where he was going with it in terms of geography. But this book has so much cool stuff. It's got family dynamics. It's got mystery. There's murders that we don't know why they're happening, and we don't know the root cause of them, and we don't know if they're connected or not. But this is a deep character dive into the psyches of a lot of people in a very, very small town that I think for the most part have a very Minnesota feel to them. Now, I know 99% of you are not in the state of Minnesota, so you don't know what I'm talking about, but William Kent Krueger brings out these elements where people don't always say what they're thinking on the inside, like a lot of Minnesotans do. They try to be really nice, but on the inside, things can fester. And by the time we get to the end of this book, there are some characters who just flat out boil over because they're so frustrated with what's gone on in the book up until that point. Number 9, William Kent Krueger's Ordinary Grace. Thank you, Mike, for your amazing Quilluminati pick. Let's move on. Coming in at number 8, this is a book that was referred to me by Jimmy Nuts from the Fantasy Network. And again, all of these books and all of these creators that I mentioned will be in the comments below, or they'll be in the description below, I should say. And this book surprised me. It surprised me when I read it, and it surprised me when I went to go make this top 10 list. And we are talking about David Mitchell's science fiction extraordinaire, Cloud Atlas. All right, so when I talked about this book back in the spring, or maybe it was early summer when I read this, I was a little mixed on it. I was hugely in favor of the unique structure of this book. And maybe what I'll do is I'll throw a card right here where I talk about Cloud Atlas a little bit more, so you can get the depths and the details of the book as it was really fresh in my mind. But when I came to thinking about who would really make the top 10 for me, what would qualify for that? Is it the best story? Is it the best characters? Is it the best author? Is it the best prose? What is it? Is it a combination of all of them? And I really began to realize that it is, yes, a combination, but it's the books that stuck with me the most. And like I said, coming in at number 8, Cloud Atlas has not left my head since I read it, purely because of the unique style and the structure of the book. Now, it really does contain about 5 stories built within this book, and we talk about it, how they go back, we go forward in time at the beginning half of the book, we go back in time at the second half of the book. Again, that video where I talked about it more will explain what I mean, but I've not seen anybody do that before. And while I didn't particularly love every story within these 5, there's a couple that will stick with me for a very long time, I believe. And the fact that this structure was so unique to anything that I've ever read, and we're talking about thousands of books, I had to include it in this list. It could not escape the top 10. Coming in at number 8, David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas. So before we get to number 7, I want to send a quick shout out to a few people. I want to say thank you to the people who've decided to join our Patreon. It's linked in the description. It's less than $2 a month. It's an intimate community, and you guys really do help pay some of the bills that it costs me to run this channel. Secondly, I would really like to thank all the new channel members. These are people that have just joined the channel directly on YouTube. All you got to do is hit the join button if that's of interest to you. It's a couple of bucks a month, and you get some custom emojis for our live chats, which we do all the time over here. Lastly, you've heard it before, but I'm going to say it again because it really does matter. If you can hit that thumbs up button, that like button, and consider subscribing if you like the vibe of what I'm doing over here on the channel, we are really trying to grow the channel. And the more people that like, subscribe, and of course, share the video, the better it is for the channel. So if you want to share this to all your socials, if you want to tell a friend, tell your mom, tell everybody, BellTube is waiting for them, and we would love to have them as part of our community. All right, enough of that. Let's move on. Coming in at number 7. This is a book that was recommended to me by 2 different people because it's a series, and they both recommended it to me. This is Tori Tekken and Alan from the Library of Alexandria. Both recommended to me Daniel Abraham's The Long Price Quartet, and the book of the 2 that I read that I'm choosing for this list to be number 7 is A Betrayal in Winter. All right, so I went into this series utterly blind. I didn't know the premise. I didn't know the setting. I didn't know the magic. I didn't know a thing about it. And what it turns out is that it's a great character story. It's a great world building story where we've got politics going on and really what makes a kingdom. In particular, the theme I think we really address hard in Betrayal in Winter is the theme of succession and how do we get from one king or one leader to the next one? And is the way that they've always done it in this particular city and this empire the way that it should be done moving forward? It's just an incredible story. It's tight. There's not a ton of characters. It's short. It's like 320 some pages. So I blasted through this sucker, pretty quickly. I liked it better than the first book, A Shadow in Summer. I think mainly because I was getting more used to Daniel Abraham's writing style in this particular series. If you're unaware, he's half of the James S.A. Corey team that wrote The Expanse, which I also love, but this is completely different, and it feels like the authorial voice is entirely different as well. Can't say enough about this series so far. I am going to be hitting book 3 very soon at the beginning of 2025. But yeah, coming in at number 7, that's pretty incredible. Long Price Quartet, A Betrayal in Winter. Let's move on. Coming in at number 6, this was a hard one to keep out of the top 5 because of the top 5, and I'll say of the top 6, numbers 2 through 6 on any given day for me could kind of move around in the rankings. But as I was thinking about it last night, and as I was trying to think about which books I really feel like need to be in the top 5, this one just missed it. But honestly, ask me tomorrow, and it could wind up in there. And I am talking about Janny Wurtz's To Ride Hell's Chasm. This is a recommendation from Tori, again from Tori Talks. Her channel's in the description. And I have really had this just wonderful blossoming friendship with the author Janny Wurtz herself. And she sent me this book. And I read this book, and I loved this book. My mom is reading this book. My mom is loving this book. It is a standalone. And one of the things that you may have noticed already in this list, there's plenty of standalones, and there's more still to come even after To Ride Hell's Chasm. You talk about a tight cast. We have a very limited number of characters here, but we get to know them intimately well. And the character of Mikhail will be stuck in my brain rent-free kind of forever, I think. And this book is really almost like 2 stories for me. The first half is a bit of a mystery, and the second half is more of an action adventure. And nobody, and I mean nobody, can select a word and put it in the exact spot of a sentence that it needs to be in for maximum impact quite like Janny Wirtz. And remember, I'm coming off of reading tons of Malazan. I've read Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun. She is in, rare air when we're talking about authors that bring skill levels that are at the peak of the mountain of being an author. Janny Wirtz, To Ride Hell's Chasm. This is an absolute huge recommend for me, particularly if you've never read her before, because it is a standalone and you're only committing yourself to about this big of a book. It does read a little bit slower than most of the books that I read by design. Janny has said very publicly that the way that she structures sentences makes it so people really have to stop and think about what it is exactly she's saying. Think of it like almost like a little speed bump on the road. This book is not designed for you to, go at 100 miles an hour. This book is designed for you to pay attention to the road so you don't go flying way off course. And also it keeps you at a speed so you truly do understand what's going on. Skimmers beware. This is not a story for you, but if you want absolutely the best kind of writing, the depths of characters, the incredibly strong theme work without beating it over your head, To Ride Hell's Chasm is the right book for you. That's coming in at number 6. Let's get to the top 5. Coming in at number 5. This is a book 2 of a series. Actually, it's in a much larger series, but it's book 2 in the City Watch arc of Discworld. Yeah, we are talking about Men-at-Arms. I read Guards last year back in 2023. The first Discworld book I picked up in 2024 was Men-at-Arms, and wouldn't you know it, it became my book of the month. I am such a gigantic Terry Pratchett fan. I'm currently reading Feet of Clay, and I'm doing it on audio, and I will say that I prefer the books in written versus audio, even though the audio is excellent. For me, just kind of as the way that Terry Pratchett has his authorial voice, for me at least, I get the humor better reading it for myself than I do listening to somebody else perform it, because it is a very nuanced humor. It is very British and it is very dry. And for me, just reading it, I get that sensibility a lot better. I have to say, now, if you guys have watched the channel before, you know I don't DNF books. And I've only DNF'd one book in my entire life, and it's book 1 in Discworld, The Color of Magic, and I disliked it so much I DNF'd it twice. And it wasn't until I started this channel that I ran into people like Tori, and I ran into people like Alan, and I ran into people like Derry that are such gigantic Discworld fans that I decided to give this another try. And everybody said start with Guards, and I did, and I loved it, and I believe it was in my top 10 for last year. And it's no big surprise that coming in at number 5, Men-at-Arms by Sir Terry Pratchett. It cracked me up. I love the characters. I love Terry Pratchett's angry view of the world told through kind of a comedic lens. If Terry Pratchett reminds me of anybody, it's probably the late American comedian George Carlin. George Carlin had all kinds of problems with society, and he used his comedy to really put a spotlight on some of the major issues of the day in his mind, and that's what I think exactly Terry Pratchett does. He's the George Carlin of fantasy, and I can't think of higher praise. Coming in at number 5, Men-at-Arms. Let's move on. Coming in at number 4, here is a book 3 of a series that I first found out about, as many of you have, from Mike's book reviews. Yes, he certainly planted the Sun Eater in a lot of our TBRs. And for me, coming in at number 4 for my top books of 2024, it's going to be this one. It's going to be book 3. It's going to be Demon in White. All right, so as far as the Sun Eater goes, I read book 1, Empire's Silence, and book 2, Howling Dark, back in 2023. This was obviously the first one that I read in 2024, and I've often described this series, for me at least, as peaking up. It's like going up the roller coaster. So you've got like book 1, book 2 is even better, book 3 is even better, and it sort of crests right there. And if you've been a regular viewer of the channel, you'll know that I wasn't particularly high on books 4 or books 5, Kingdoms of Death or Ashes of Man. And I understand why I'm not that high. There's just certain elements in those stories that I don't love. It doesn't disqualify Sun Eater from being an amazing series. In fact, I would submit that books 4 and books 5 are hugely important to the Sun Eater because they have events that otherwise life would just be, you know, all sunshine and roses and rainbows for our main character, Hadrian Marlowe. In Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man, we get the titles right there that tell us that our MC is going to go through some stuff, right? This one, he still goes through some stuff, but better stuff, in my opinion. More exciting, a little bit more action, more where our main character is in control of the events around him rather than being controlled. But Christopher Rocchio, an imagination that's unparalleled. Space opera that spans centuries. We are talking about cryogenics when people are going from one system, you know, in the universe to another system in the universe. Well, they got to put themselves in cryogenic chambers because it's going to take hundreds of years to get the ship from here to there. And he does this with such a deft hand where literally 600 years can go by, and to our characters, it's like they just went to sleep for a nap and they wake up and they got to find out what's happened in the last 600 years. It's incredible. I'm a huge fan of the Sun Eater. It absolutely made a comeback for me with This Quiet Gods, which is book 6. And it really came down to, for me, which book did I like better? Did I like Demon in White or did I like Disquiet Gods? I like this one a bit better. That's why it's coming in at number 4. Let's move on. Coming in at number 3, here's another standalone book. I've only read one other book by this author. I read it last year. It did make my top 10 list. And now we are talking about number 3. And again, anything from like 2 to number 6 on any given day could have alternated spots. But for today, it's number 3. And we are talking about Guy Gavriel Kay's The Lions of Al-Rassan. Wow, did I love this book. It centers around 3 main characters. So again, we have a really tight cast here. And the thing that I love a lot about GGK, and I know you've heard this a lot, is that he'll take basically famous cities and famous timelines on our planet, move them to another planet altogether. We know this because there's multiple moons in the sky, so we know it's a fantasy book. There's just a touch of magic to put this into the fantasy category. It doesn't have as much magic as the other book that I read of his, which is Tigana, but the story itself in The Lions of Al-Rassan, for me, is a little bit better than Tigana, but not by a lot. I know that there's some people that just think this is the far superior book. I think they're actually pretty close. The setting for this book is medieval Spain-esque, right, on that other planet. But one of the main characters is essentially El Cid, who is a famous historical character here in our world in medieval Spain. We have 3 main religions, just like we did back then, and they're all sort of pointing the fingers at each other for the troubles of the world. This is such a cool book, you guys. The prologue, if the prologue doesn't draw you into this book, then I don't know what to say. The prologue is super short. I think it's like less than 5 pages, maybe even less than that. It might be less than 3. I don't remember. Anyway, The Lions of Al-Rassan. Characters I'll never forget. A storyline I'll never forget. Action scenes that really, Guy Gavriel Kay has a unique touch to. It's not as down and dirty and gritty as, like, say, a Bernard Cornwell, but it's eloquent and it's just all-encompassing of everything that's going around, not in the immediate battle just per se, but in why all the battles are going on and the politics and the kingdoms and everything else. Guy Gavriel Kay, he's not really, I'm going to say underrated because he's talked about a lot on BookTube. I wish more people were reading him. I know Josh from Red Fury Books has read like 9 of his books this year and is going to complete out the catalog. I know Jake Bishop has read all of it. So I am going to be reading A Song for Our Bone very soon, but coming in at number 3, a very, very strong recommend for me in a standalone book, The Lions of Al-Rassan, Guy Gavriel Kay. Let's move on. Coming in at number 2. Here's where we run into where I mentioned earlier in the rules, only one book per author. Since I already mentioned him in the honorable mentions, you know who I'm talking about. It's Steven Erikson, and yes, it is book 3 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, Memories of Ice. All right, where do you even begin with this? I've never read anything like Malazan before, and if I'm going to give some credit to people that referred this to me, it's going to be Mad on Books out in Germany, it's going to be Dr. Philip Chase, and it is going to be Jimmy Nuts. The 3 of them all told me they thought that Malazan would be a series that I would just absolutely want to devour, and they were completely correct. These guys know me pretty well. I love Malazan. I can't get enough of it. It drives me crazy sometimes that I don't have enough time in the month to sneak in the next Malazan book because they're so long and they take a long time to read, but they're fantastic. The cast of characters is sprawling, right? So I know I've talked about earlier in today's video, one of the things I like about some books is when they have a very tight cast. There's an exception to every rule. And when you have a sprawling cast like Malazan does, if you are able to make those characters stand out and be unique and have their own voices, and you know who's really in the scene by the tonality of what the dialogue is and what their actions are, then, my friends, you run into Malazan. And I have to say, it was so close between this book, Memories of Ice, and House of Chains. I liked them both better than Gardens of the Moon or Dead House Gates, and I like those as well. But so far, it's kind of been like Dead House Gates was number 2, and then Memories of Ice was number 3, and then House of Chains only dipped just by a little bit, and it's only because some of my favorite characters in all of Malazan weren't in House of Chains, so we got to go with Memories of Ice. I tell you, please give Malazan a try if you haven't yet, especially if you're an experienced reader. If you are new to fantasy, don't start with Malazan because you'll probably just be burned out, turned off to the whole genre. But if you've been contemplating it, now's as good a time as any. Coming in at number 2, Memories of Ice, Steven Erikson. Let's get to number 1. Coming in at number 1. Yep, it happened again, you guys, just like last year. As you know, this channel really covers fantasy, science fiction, and lit RPG 99% of the time. Occasionally, we will dip our toes into historical fiction, and the number 1 book that I read in 2024, it wasn't even close. This was the first one that I knew was already winning, and I read it back in March, and we are talking about the one and only James Clavell's Shogun. You guys, this is a big book. You don't need to read all 6 parts at once, but I did. I knew that the show was coming out on FX. I knew that I wanted to at least be current as the episodes came out, so I was going to break this thing up into like sections 1, sections 2, then maybe 3, 4, and then maybe 5, 6. I couldn't do it. If you want to talk about the ultimate of the theme of a stranger in a strange land, if it's going to be on Earth and if it's going to be in historical fiction, it is really tough to beat what happens in James Clavell's Shogun. We have a 16th century Englishman who is a pilot of a Dutch ship who gets shipwrecked off the coasts of the Japans, as they call it. And when he washes ashore, his whole world has changed. He's running into people that clearly, obviously don't speak anything close to English or Portuguese as he speaks. There's priests there that do speak Portuguese, so he's able to communicate with the Japanese only through Portuguese. It is such an in-depth character study. It broadened my horizons so much to feudal Japan and what that time period was really all about. Yeah, and I understand that this is historical fiction. I understand that a lot of the kind of real-life characters in the book Shogun were kind of handpicked from different parts of time by the author, James Clavell, to make a cohesive story. And so it's not like a biography. It's not nonfiction. But The sensibilities of what it would be like are all right there. We have characters that we absolutely love. We have characters that we absolutely love to hate. And that I love in an antagonist, right? Because they all have their own motives, which they think they're right. And nothing that I've read shows me any antagonist better than some of the ones in Shogun, that they are doing what they think is best for them, their family, their feudal, areas that they're in control of, and ultimately what's best for Japan. The Anjin-san, the pilot, our main character, John Blackthorne, it just cracks me up that he's considered a barbarian because he doesn't bathe. And if we think about it, that's a normal thing in our lives, right? We clean ourselves up in the morning. No, these guys back then, they didn't bathe. They'd go months. And I'm sure you can imagine how nasty that would be when you come into a culture that is used to daily bathing. They don't want to be anywhere near these gross people from, the Dutch part of the world or from England or really anywhere. Japan is highly unique as a country, and this is just a great exploration of the feudal times, the times of the samurai, the times of honor, the times of where your honor to your feudal lord is really far more important than to your own family. I just couldn't take enough of this book. Shogun is heads and tails over everything else in James Clavell's Asian Saga, and that's why it's coming in for the 2024 number one pick from me. It's Shogun all the way. Let's talk about a one for the road today, and it's going to be about expanding our book horizons, because as we looked at this top 10 list and the honorable mentions, we had things from litrpg, from fantasy, sci-fi, historical fiction, literary fiction, easy to read books like Two Lies, Two Thrones, hard to read books like Shogun and Malazan, To Ride Hell's Chasm, and everything in between. And my challenge for all of us today is do one simple thing. Add a book to your TBR coming up in January or February that you think is slightly outside your comfort zone in terms of reading, either genre level or just in terms of challenge level, and set your mind to actually reading it. At the end of the day, I've said this a million times, but I'm going to say it again. It's just a book. There is no reason to ever be intimidated by a book. The worst case is you read the sentence 2 or 3 times, or you read the paragraph 2 or 3 times, or you go get a dictionary if you don't know the word, meaning, whatever. My point is this. If all we do is stick to what we know, we're never gonna know and appreciate what we don't already know. We have to try new things from time to time. The beginning of the year is a fantastic time to expand our reading horizons, and I hope you think about that and give it a shot. I gotta thank everybody for watching this top 10 video, but most importantly, you guys are the life of this channel. Thank you for being here in 2024. In the comments below, please leave me, if you feel like it, your whole top 10 list, or if you just want to list maybe your top 1 or 2 books that you came across in 2024, that would be awesome, because I promise you some of those suggestions will become part of my TBR for 2025. We're on this journey together, you guys. It's a complete blast. I'll see you in 2025. For now, here's your fortune.